we get in return from the Americans for putting ourselves in lockstep with them, for backing them up on their 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles? We got slapped with our own tariffs. That's how Donald Trump, the Americans were slapping 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles.
We were just surprised at China. I have a very good relationship with President Xi, and they did that. This is not something that I, instigated.
Canada's double cross with China was meant to outsmart Trump and prove its independence. Instead, it unleashed chaos, outrage, and one of the fastest political backfires in recent memory. Within hours, Canada was left scrambling for damage control, isolated on the world stage, and caught in a storm of its own making.
The Americans get something, and then they hit you over the head with it. Forget about it. I think that Canada would be very wise to start negotiating what China is putting on the table now. We keep talking.
It all starts quietly. A late-night handshake in Ottawa between Carney's government officials and Chinese trade envoys. Cameras click, smiles flash, and the press release calls it routine diplomacy. But behind those polished smiles lies something far bigger and far more dangerous. Because this isn't just a handshake, it's a pivot, a slow, deliberate tilt toward Beijing.
Trading relationship in the world, so of course, Donald Trump decided to break it. Fine, let's deal with that reality, and let's build other relationships, including with China. I think
Canadians are told it's just a harmless trade diversification plan, a fancy way of saying Canada wants more trading partners. But the truth? It's a full-blown gamble. A message to Trump's America that Canada doesn't need to play by Washington's rules anymore. Carney wanted to look bold, independent, untouchable. But what he didn't realize is that in geopolitics, timing is everything. And he just made his move at the worst possible moment.
Chinese were subsidizing illegally and that they had to be stopped. It was simply a question of market competition. The Chinese are able to produce high-quality electric vehicles that could be sold in Canada for something like $35,000 or $40,000.
Within hours, whispers start reaching Washington. A few trade analysts leak the details, and suddenly the routine diplomacy looks more like a diplomatic betrayal. The so-called ally of the United States secretly sealing trade terms with Beijing, right when tensions between the US and China are on fire. Carney thought he was playing chess, but he just set off a geopolitical explosion.
The benefit, but we put ourselves, as I say, we put ourselves in the same boat as the Americans, saying 100% tariffs, we're keeping you out effectively. Tony.
At first, Washington goes completely silent, and that's never a good sign. When the White House doesn't respond right away, it means something's coming, something big. By evening, the calm breaks. A single line from Trump's team hits the airwaves. Allies are measured by loyalty. No context, no names, but everyone knows exactly who it's for.
The Americans were slapping 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles.
Hours later, the hammer drops. Trump announces a 100% tariff on Chinese imports, effective November 1st. He doesn't even need to mention Canada. The message is loud and clear. If you side with my enemy, you become collateral damage. It's not just about trade anymore. It's personal. It's political. It's Trump sending a warning to every ally thinking of pulling the same stunt. For Carney, it's a nightmare unfolding in real time. Overnight, his trade diversification plan turns into an act of rebellion. And Washington doesn't forgive rebellion easily.
The fact that we put ourselves in lockstep with the Americans even prior to Donald Trump's re-election.
Within days, the ripple effects hit every corner of the economy. U.S. Customs started holding Canadian shipments for review, exports stalled, and containers piled up at the border. Markets panicked as canola prices crashed by nearly 30% overnight, while factories across Ontario froze orders and struggled with soaring material costs. Soon, the impact reached ordinary Canadians. Fuel prices climbed, groceries jumped, and the cost of everyday life skyrocketed almost overnight.
Chinese were subsidizing illegally and that they had to be stopped. It was simply a question of market competition.
Carney's bold step toward independence suddenly looks like a self-inflicted wound. He calls it diversification. The markets call it economic suicide. And here's the twist that no one in Ottawa saw coming. Beijing planned this all along.
China's ambassador to Canada says China will drop its tariffs on agriculture if Canada drops its EV tariffs on China. How should
the friendly trade offer? It was bait. A perfectly timed test to see if Canada would crack under pressure and turn its back on Washington. For China, this wasn't about trade at all. It was about optics. They wanted the world to see cracks in the Western alliance, and Carney gave them exactly what they wanted. As soon as the deal goes public and the US retaliates, Beijing suddenly goes quiet. The calls stop, the promises fade. No new shipments, no new contracts, nothing. Ottawa looks around and realizes it's standing alone.
In Great Britain, the number one selling vehicles are Chinese electric vehicles. And is there any reason why Canada should be suffering the imposition of the tariffs by China on our agricultural products, including canola, of course? It's hurting our farmers.
In a matter of days, Canada has managed to do the impossible: anger Washington, disappoint its allies, and get ghosted by Beijing, all at once. The very power Carney thought he could balance between just pulled the rug from under him.
Yes, because taxpayers have to pay the subsidies to try to help those canola farmers. And what
Now Canada's trade future looks like a bad chess game. Every move forward leads to another trap. Every headline, another humiliation. And while Ottawa scrambles to control the damage, Beijing just watches. Mission accomplished.
Chinese are very smart business people, and they're very smart negotiators, and they understand this issue better than any.
Because for China, it was never about the deal. It was about the message. And Carney just broadcast it to the whole world. The US-Canada alliance isn't as unbreakable as everyone thought.
Trump is trying to clear out the Canadian automobile industry. Why do we keep saying that we're going to keep out these high-quality, inexpensive electric vehicles that, by the way, on top of everything else, are good for the environment? Why do we want to keep doing that and at the same time get hit by our canola exports? When the
Carney thought he could outsmart everyone by keeping Trump calm, keeping China happy, and making Canada look like the cool, independent kid in class who doesn't pick sides. He tried walking that fine line, smiling for Washington one day and shaking hands with Beijing the next, hoping to pull off a diplomatic miracle. But global politics isn't a balancing act, it's a minefield. And Carney just decided to dance right through it barefoot, flirting with two rival superpowers who were never going to send him flowers. And they did. Washington had been offering partnership deals, even funding help for infrastructure. But Carney, trying to look strong, brushed it off like Canada didn't need America's help. He called it economic independence. Trump called it an insult. And if there's one thing history has taught us, it's this: Trump doesn't take insults quietly.
Quality electric vehicles that could be sold in Canada for something like 35 or 40,000 Canadian dollars, much less than most of the electric vehicles on the market now.
Within weeks, Trump's tariffs hit like a wrecking ball, but not just at China, but across everything tied to Canada's trade routes. Energy, cars, agriculture, nothing was spared. Trump didn't need to say a word. The message was loud and clear. If you stand with Beijing, Washington won't stand with you. It wasn't just policy anymore, and it was punishment.
Americans are giving nothing in return except grief and higher tariffs on us. We're just the world's biggest suckers if we keep going along with that.
Carney thought he was being clever, playing diplomat between two giants. Instead, he ended up lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. Across the prairies, farmers watched helplessly as their canola sat in silos, prices crashing nearly 30% overnight. Their biggest buyer, the US, had suddenly turned its back, and what was once Canada's strongest export lifeline became a dead end.
Not a coincidence that the Chinese are raising this right now, talking with Vashi Kapelas and saying, okay, this is what we think should be on the table. But it's
In Ontario, the story was just as grim. Auto factories slowed production, assembly lines stood silent, and thousands of workers braced for layoffs. Meanwhile, the threat of cheap Chinese EVs flooded the market, turning what was once a proud manufacturing hub into a battleground for survival. The government promised stability, but investors weren't buying it, literally.
Farmers are getting hit by this very hard. And do you want to continue with that? Or do you want to open up your market to our electric vehicles that would help your consumers and help your market?
By the third week, the crisis had trickled down to everyone. Fuel prices jumped, grocery shelves thinned, and small businesses felt the choke of inflation. Families began tightening their budgets as every trip to the store became a grim reminder of how fast things had spiraled. What was supposed to be a new trade chapter now looked more like a national nightmare with no exit.
The Americans are no longer ever going to be considered reliable trading partners. Look,
Internationally, the damage was just as brutal. Canada's long-standing image as the calm, reliable partner was shattered overnight. Washington called Ottawa unreliable, while Europe muttered reckless. One EU trade official summed it up with cutting precision. Why risk your biggest trading partner for a market that barely buys 5% of your exports? Confidence vanished. The Canadian dollar slipped. Investors pulled out in waves, leaving markets gasping for stability. The grand vision of independence turned into isolation. Trump didn't need to celebrate, his tariffs did the talking. Every Canadian misstep only reinforced what Washington already knew, that in the global game of power, Canada still plays by American rules. The so-called pivot to China was meant to be bold, but it only exposed how fragile that independence truly was. Like the video and hit the subscribe button to get more updates.